Thank you so much. If my fellow panelists could join me. So fittingly for a talk on space, we seem to be in a room that feels genuinely close to absolute zero. So thank you for handling the air conditioning. My name is Alan Duffy. I'm an astrophysics professor at Swinburne University in Melbourne. I'm also the lead scientist of the Royal Institution of Australia. It is my absolute honor to be your moderator for this discussion on the case for space. And I want to acknowledge and thank the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center for organizing this event. It's been incredible, quite frankly. It's been fascinating, stimulating, and there's a lot of food for thought. The promise of space is what brings us here today, and that promise is it can inspire, innovate, and invigorate economies, nations, generations. The Mars 2017 vision, if realized, will lead to new technologies, techniques, and talent, as generations of the best and brightest are focused in a quest that spans across engineering, science, and technology. But those benefits from a vision of Mars a century from now can be enjoyed on Earth today. Crops optimized for Mars will flourish in water-stressed regions like the UAE or my home, Australia. Medicines to protect us on the journey to the red planet can directly impact cancer treatments at home. And of course, technologies not yet envisaged will find their way into the economy here long before they're used out there. So while it's clear that I believe in the value of space and admire the vision of Mars 2117, it's important to be respectful of public funds and to gain the maximum benefit from that investment. To help expand this case for space is an illustrious international panel. Joining me today, we have John C. Mankins, President at Mankins Space Technology. Mr. Mankins' 25-year career at NASA and Caltech's JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, ranged from flight projects and space mission operations to systems-level innovation and advanced technology R&D management. Next, we have Marit Undseth, Senior Policy Analyst in the OECD Space Forum. Marit has more than 10 years' experience in public policy research, developing and analyzing economic indicators for the space sector, as well as evaluating space-related policies, especially as regards to innovation. And finally, we have Dr. Henry R. Hertzfeld, Research Professor of Space Policy and International Affairs at the George Washington University. Dr. Hertzfeld is an expert in the economic, legal, and policy issues of space and advanced technology development. He has served as a senior economist and policy analyst at both NASA and the National Science Foundation. So I think you agree we have the right skills on stage to make the case for space. Each of our panelists will take in turn to give their pitch, if we want to call it that. And then we will proceed to questions. So, with that in mind, would you please make all our panelists feel very welcome? A little round of applause.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And I will take 10 seconds to just echo my thanks to the organizers for this event, which I hope will become a lasting feature of the World Government Summit. So I have tried to look forward to the goal of Mars 2117 and to the goal of a settlement on Mars. Not a camp, not a sortie, but a true sustainable and self-sufficient settlement. Thinking of it in that way, the goal of such a settlement on Mars is a tremendously challenging one technically. It comprises a wide variety of systems-level technology areas and innumerable discipline technologies. Areas, of course, such as energy, manufacturing, transportation, resource extraction, processing, manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare, housing, and many, many others. All of these have the opportunity, as Dr. Duffy mentioned a moment ago, to lead to truly global impact innovations. However, understanding what those innovations might be and how their impact might relate to the global economy requires an understanding of the systems and a modeling of those systems and an understanding of the potential advances that would be required. I thought I might just highlight for a moment what it is we are talking about. So, of course, Mars is much smaller than the Earth, but even at half the diameter of the Earth, with no oceans, represents a larger land area than on the Earth. It has many of the same kinds of astronomical features, such as an aerosynchronous orbit, which is equivalent to a geostationary Earth orbit. It lends itself to many of the same kinds of space infrastructures. However, it lacks an active molten iron core, which the Earth enjoys, and as a consequence, it does not have a strong ongoing electromagnetic field and has no radiation belts. And so it has a significant issue with regard to the radiation exposure of the Mars environment and low Mars orbit from the Sun. The day uniquely is almost identical to the Earth, a little longer than 24 hours, but the year is twice as long. Probably for our purposes, the two most significant differences are, one, the insolation, the amount of sunlight at one Mars orbit, which is only about 590 watts per square meter on average, as opposed to that which we enjoy at 1 AU, the Earth's orbit, which is about 1,400 watts per square meter. To give you an example of one of the challenges, I turn to energy for a moment. So an advantage to get from Earth to space requires on the order of, and taking into account drag in the atmosphere and so on, and gravity losses in launch to space, nevertheless requires something like 20 kilowatt hours for every kilogram that is put into low Earth orbit. Mars, because the gravity is much lower and there is no drag, the atmosphere is essentially a vacuum, is only 1/10 as much. So getting to and from the surface of Mars will be dramatically easier than it is going to and from the surface of the Earth if you're doing it propulsively. Obviously, with the lack of atmosphere, there are major issues with using aerodynamics. Basic life support, non-trivial. This is just living, not anything else, on the order of 150,000 kilowatt hours per person per year. Making things that you can use, very challenging. Just a couple of examples. Aluminum, on the order of 80 kilowatt hours per kilogram to make aluminum from bauxite, from raw aluminum ore. To make a finished product, such as an automobile, I use that just as an example, on the order of 10,000 kilowatt hours for a 1,000 kilogram automobile. So making things requires a great deal of energy, of electricity. Agriculture, which I'll highlight more in a moment, is the most significant energy requirement which we will face in having a settlement on Mars. In particular, it takes something like 1,000 square meters to 4,000 square meters to produce enough food of all types for one individual. And that 1,000 to 4,000 square meters has to have an incident light, solar influx, as insolation, on the order of 500 watts per square meter. And that's approximately 12 hours out of every 24. And obviously all the details depend on the specifics of the plant life. But nevertheless, it is a tremendous energy requirement to produce the food for a population on Mars. In addition, there's the requirements of the atmosphere, significant amounts of nitrogen, the soil requirements, water requirements, and species. We will not go to Mars alone. We will go to Mars with literally tens of thousands of other species. Fungi, bacteria, viruses, insects, worms, all manner. And of course, there's the energy input, and not to neglect the energy output. So there's the requirement, once you bring the energy into the habitat, to get rid of it, a tremendous waste heat problem. And there are the various cycles, carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, sodium, and so on. I wanted to highlight a particular notional location where a major settlement on Mars, a first experiment in terraforming, might be located. And this, I don't think this has a laser pointer, but everyone's very familiar, I think, with the Valles Marineris. So just south of the greatest canyon system on the planet, there are these two twin craters. And I highlight them because each of these craters, which are located just south of the south rim of the Valles Marineris, both of them are lined up almost perfectly due north from some impact event many, many, many millions of years ago. And each one is about 50 kilometers in diameter. So if you envision placing bubbles, domes over these two, and given the land requirements for agriculture, these two locations, which would then be redundant, could represent a total settlement, a miniature biosphere, a miniature experiment in terraforming that would support 500,000 people, i.e. 2 times 250,000. However, each of those places, whereas on Earth we have approximately 1 to 2 kilowatts per person energy usage, each of those places would, fully populated, require on the order of 250 gigawatts to a terawatt of power in order, and I'm not saying how you get the power, you could have an open dome and so on, not open, but transparent dome. But you need that much energy for the agriculture to support those number of people. And I have an obligatory image of one approach to doing this, which is to place large power stations in Mars orbit and transmit the power wirelessly down to the outposts on the southern edge of the Great Canyon. I highlight that as a concept only in brief to make the point that a settlement on Mars, including the agriculture, the transportation, the energy, the thermal, structural, all of those aspects, understanding that and identifying the technologies that need to be advanced in order to make it possible is a systems analysis problem. And the discipline of systems analysis, which goes back to the 1950s, was invented in the midst of the Cold War, involves understanding the network of relationships among the system of systems and appropriately modeling them at the right scale of resolution. And I put this up just as an illustration of how such a systems analysis model might be constructed at the highest level, including analytical models of the primary systems, a set of controls, things that you can tweak, independent variables to drive the selection of technologies, identification of supporting systems such as transportation, putting in and understanding the cost estimation for various selections, and ultimately driving out the markets and the economics. In all of that, within these models, there is a set of key performance parameters that have to be identified, things like how many people, the total volume of the habitat, and therefore being able to calculate the volume per person, the efficiency of the energy flows, and so on and so on. I will just say in closing that overall, I think the value proposition for Mars 2117 and for this vision of a settlement on Mars includes somehow doing a proper systems analysis to shape investment portfolios and to identify opportunities for research and development, to conduct the research and technology development in areas that are of importance, both for the settlement and for Mars. And therefore, the first part of the value proposition for making such an investment comes from the new intellectual property which will result. think this would be an engine for the creation of patents, international patents. Tremendous potential for space applications, both for the moon, for the kinds of resource exploitation that was mentioned previously. Already discussed several times today is the unparalleled opportunity for inspiration. But I will also highlight that part of the value proposition is the establishment of core competencies, the laboratories, the manufacturing, the technology development capabilities that would be necessary to accomplish this goal and the tremendous benefit that they would have for the UAE. So thank you very much.
I love that you already have your future home, you know, you've outlined it, you're pretty happy with that cave. Right, well, next presentation, Marit, would you like to step up?
So I will talk about the case for space as well, but from a quite different perspective than John here. We're returning to Earth. I will approach this from the point of view of the OECD Space Forum, just a small introduction about what we are and what we do. We look at space, we explore the economic dimensions of space and also the role that space plays in innovation activities. And we do this from the position in a non-space economic organization, which means that it focuses much more on economic excellence, statistical collection, and also policy review and recommendations. And we're also then well placed to highlight the issues important to space, to the space sector, outside the sector and to quite high political circles. But now, so the topic for today's session was the case for space. One may argue that we need a case for space, because everybody's joining in space these days. Space has never been more popular. I mean, we have more than 80 countries with a satellite orbiting the Earth. We have countries on all continents with a space program or space agency of some sort. And the value of space activities is growing increasingly. I guess space industry is worth somewhere between 250 and 300 billion US dollars. And we have this variety of actors now in the space sector, both public and private. This leads to more international cooperation. This was discussed in the session before. I mean, Dubai and the United Arab Emirates is a very good example of international cooperation. Of course, it also leads to more competition and disruption in some segments of the space sector. But that's just part of the transformation of the sector that we're seeing today. But, of course, when there is more activity, more programs, more money invested into space programs, there's also a growing need for justifying these public sector investments. Now, justifying or through evaluation and also impact assessment. Carrying out these assessments is very difficult. Something tells me that Henry will be talking about in his presentation afterwards. It's not because I just looked at his slides. I mean, for any R&D activity, it's very difficult to correctly or even sensibly estimate which are the real impacts. Space is no exception for that. But still, I mean, assessments need to be carried out one way or the other. So at the OECD, we guide countries and governments in this. I mean, we track methodologies, we collect case studies, and I mean, there are many different ways of assessing a program. You can assess, it depends on what you assess, which type of activity are we talking about? Is it the science activity? Is it more for Earth observation? When you carry out the assessment, is it before? Is it during? Is it after? And also where in the decision-maker pyramid that this assessment is being carried out. Is it at the top government level? Is it at the agency level? Or is it at the program level? So, I mean, we have all these types of different different methodologies. But before you carry out any type of evaluation, it's extremely important to have a much better grasp of the activities and the actors in your own country. What the ecosystem is, who are the main actors, how does this happen? And for that we have, at the OECD Space Forum, 2 strong recommendations to any country engaging in space activities. So the first one is to map activities in the countries, map industrial activities. That means that you make use of the resources and data that you already have. This can be business registers, this can be contract information for grants. There is often a wealth of data that can be better exploited than what is currently the case. And then you start from there, and then you carry out regular surveys. And it's important that you do this systematically and regularly to build much better data. And these surveys need to include more than just industry actors. It needs to include academia, needs to include also government organizations, which are important in the space sector when it comes to innovation and carrying out R&D activities. Now, the second recommendation we have is that you also need to review and map, if you like, policy instruments related to space activities. This means you really have to look at all relevant policies that pertain to space activities and to space innovation, and to make sure that they go in line with the objectives of the program, of the policy that you have in mind, and that they are complementary to each other. And by policy instruments, I talk about institutions, programs, grants, tax incentive schemes, that kind of thing. And what is particularly important is that, because by reviewing these instruments and looking at the design, you can actually enhance the value and the return of the programs, especially when it comes to encouraging collaboration and technology transfer. And depending on the design of the policy, this can be done to a smaller or greater degree. And with that, my presentation is over. I thank you very much for your attention. And I would just like to, if you're curious about where the space sector is heading, we have a workshop on this in Paris in April in a couple of months. So you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marit. Now, Henry, hopefully we load your presentation. We could be shuffling around this time. And I might have to indulge a few extra minutes from the session chair, just so we get a bit of a discussion.
Okay, well, I see we're running short on time. We're at the end of a very long day. So I will try to go through these fairly quickly and just make some major comments and major conclusions. First of all, when I thought about this, I was thinking about space as a large investment, not particular uses or a very narrow focus. We're talking, again, about 100 years from now, 2117, 18, and Mars would be a very expensive investment. So we're talking about using economics to make the case for space. And let's see. Let's start out. Let's be honest about it. We've been trying to use economics for 40 years, 50 years, even more, to make that case. And I must say, we haven't convinced anybody on basis of large economic results or numbers to make that case. And that is space a good investment? I will end up saying it is, but I'm going to start out saying it is not. Space is difficult, it's risky, it's very expensive, particularly high expenses and upfront barriers to entry. It's hard. And those barriers are not just economic, they're legal and even technological as well. So, does space compete when you compare the investments with other uses of the money, what a typical economist would do? And you can make money in the short term much more easily than investing in space. However, the long-run horizons are well beyond any business planning horizon. And when we look at benefit cost, cost-benefit ratios, a return on investment, an ROI measure, or even on the large impacts on gross domestic product, they all are full of theoretical and data problems and inaccuracies. And therefore, I come to this conclusion: making the case for space in this way will not work. However, we have to believe in space. Succeeding in space ventures is a very high-profile and cutting-edge business. We have to keep in mind also that we are using space for terrestrial applications, and those are very valuable. Economics is just one way of making the argument. There are many others, and it is one input into these decisions, not the input into those decisions. So we have to ask why and how. And this chart, although it's difficult to read, is there to illustrate one point. When I first started working with the space sector a long time ago, all we talked about were jobs created, income created, and the spin-off, the tech transfers, in a very simplistic way. The shorthand was Tang and Velcro in those days. As you move down that left-hand chart, what are we talking about now? We are talking about business plans. We are talking about real investments. We are talking about the basic structure of our economy and how we are dependent on space. This is very different from the R&D that we were talking about a long time ago. We have matured, and it is obvious and it is important. We look at the actual economic benefits. They stimulate education and innovation. This has been talked about many times today. You also have to grow an industry to a critical mass, a size large enough that it can stay active with many programs, innovate in and of itself. And the firm and industry level produce and scale economies so you can do things more cheaply. At the larger regional and national basis, what I have up here are agglomeration economies. What I mean by that is you have not only your labs, but you have the repair facilities, you have the experts around. They're all in one area, they support each other. That's an important benefit. But even more important are the hidden benefits. These we don't measure and we can't measure very well. Space is becoming critical infrastructure. It is not electricity, it is not water, it is not critical infrastructure today, but what it does is greatly improve the efficiency and the productivity of the infrastructure. Measuring those at a micro level, you won't be able to do very well. We don't have tools, we don't have the information, but it's there. And so some people will come up with tens of billions of dollars, more than that 300, hundreds of millions of dollars and trillions of space benefits. They very well may be there, even if we can't verify that number. And space also, through our capabilities, makes nations become partners in world affairs. I want to address just nations that are fairly new entrants, such as the Emirates, into the space business. How do you do it? Well, you're doing it. You invest in activities of direct importance to your population and ones that have high popular visibility, whether that's putting an astronaut in space, a 100-year program for Mars, something that attracts a lot of attention. They're recognizable achievements. You want to develop your science and engineering talent, and you want to gain experience through international cooperative efforts with nations that have been doing things in space for even a longer time. And the cooperation is important to realize many benefits. The Mars Hope mission that the Emirates is working on now actually illustrates that. Several years ago, they signed an agreement with NASA. NASA's been to Mars, and they can help. The actual launch won't be from likely from a UAE vehicle. It'll be from a Japanese vehicle. These are good things. So in summary, I want to emphasize that a long-run perspective is essential. Space R&D is an investment in very fundamental economic structures. Earth science space applications are really how we measure it. We don't have a LEO economy. We don't have settlements that, without umbilical cords. We are here on Earth. Our companies are here, and that's where we are really actually the population realizes the benefits from space. So we have highly visible space missions that provide additional benefits, even though we can't absolutely come to a number and measure them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. So I'm now going to have to beg the indulgence. Can I just one or two questions? Is that okay? 1 minute, all right, okay, so very quick answers. Very, very simple in that case. What is the prospect for creating a tool, a guide, such that a nation can invest in particular technologies with the hope that they may be realized? So in other words, you focus on crewed missions, you get useful health benefits out. What would it take to have that level of control over the potential future technological benefits from investing in space? Is such a thing possible? Very quickly, everyone.
So, the simple answer, if you can define your goals and objectives with adequate fidelity, then you can explore the trade space of options for how to achieve those goals and objectives and choose what you want to optimize, such as cost or schedule or whatever it's going to be. And then you can get out information that informs your research and technology investment portfolio. If it's completely loose and you have no idea what you're trying to accomplish, then you can just make up anything you like.
Again, yes, I agree. If it's a simple program, it's clearly defined, and especially you have an idea of how you want to collect the data and a plan for that at the beginning, onset of the program, then it's definitely possible to measure the impact according to those preset criteria.
So would it be possible to predict that then, Henry?
I think, let me answer that by expanding a little bit on John's comment on the portfolio. Don't put your eggs in one basket, spread them. Not everything is going to succeed. And on the average, you can measure them, but you can't predict where those measures are going to be the largest.
Okay, well, look, wise words. To finish on, would you join me in thanking our speakers for the session and give yourselves a round of applause for making it to the end of an incredible first day of the World Government Summit.